Welcome back to the Bob Davis Podcasts. This is podcast 54. We're live from the apartment in Uptown where everything is happening. It is Saturday night, and it's bar close time. So the windows are all open around me, and the rugs are up off the floors. It's got the hardwood floors, and so you can really hear the room, and I'm pretty excited about that. They added some new technology to the podcast facility here in the apartment in Uptown where everything's happening. Unfortunately, I'm having a little problem with one of the mic preamps. So if you're hearing some hiss, just be aware of that. Now you're going to be obsessed with it, but that's what it is. Most of what you hear is noise from outside, but you might be hearing a little bit of hiss from that preamp, because I certainly am, and it's driving me nuts. So I'll probably fix it tomorrow by going to my favorite place, my home away from home, Guitar Center, which actually should be a sponsor of the podcasts. But anyway, I'll have to go over there and maybe buy a new preamp tomorrow, but they're kind of expensive, and I really don't want to do that. So anyway, let's get back to the podcast. This is podcast 54. As you know, I haven't done a podcast in a while because I've been working, if you can call working in radio working. As many of you know, in April of 2009, after about 10 years at KSTP, I was purged. And it launched me on an 18-month odyssey, which culminated in a new on-air job with a new radio station. I'm now co-hosting the morning show at News Talk 100.3 FM KTLK here in the Twin Cities with my friend Tom Emmer, and it's great. But being on the air and doing podcasts are two completely different things. And I love doing the podcasts. It's one of the things that I really cherish from the time that I wasn't on the air every day. I just love doing the podcasts. So I'm going to keep doing them. Now that everything's sort of settled down, I'll be doing more regular podcasts. So many of you are going to begin again to receive the RSS feeds, and the podcasts will be back on the iTunes. And you can also just check it out on thebobdavispodcast.com, and I'll put notes up on Facebook and so forth and so on, so you can be aware of what's going on. And you guys can let me know what's going on Twitter or through email at bdavis7843@yahoo.com, or, of course, on Facebook. All right? This podcast 54, I would like to be for all of the people who are unemployed right now. So think about that, and we'll start by why I'm doing this. The other day during the show, a caller used the phrase "war weary" to describe his mood during a discussion of the president's decision to withdraw some troops from Afghanistan. Now, that doesn't have much to do with this podcast, other than I objected to the use of the phrase as it pertains to the current conflict, what we used to call the war on terror. And I had a viscerally really strong reaction to it, and I think I freaked everybody out because I got really upset. And I'll start with the definition of the term weary. Weary means to be exhausted in strength, endurance, or vigor. The meaning of the phrase war weary is to be utterly exhausted and dejected by war, especially after a long conflict. I don't think either term applies to America's military deployments in Iraq or Afghanistan, or for that matter, anywhere in the world. You know, we will do podcasts and we will talk about foreign policy and these troop deployments and different politicians' views on them. But I don't like the term because I don't think it describes accurately what is going on in this country. When I look out my window, the words that come to mind are not utterly exhausted or dejected. You know, depending on what time of the day, I look out the window, you know, and I see people coming in and out of the Lunds or streaming home from the bars in Uptown. They're dressed well. They're either drunk because they had enough money to buy beer, or they're going in to buy food at the Lunds. Now, I'm going to tell you, this exchange really set me off, as I said, and everybody I work with was really put off at my rage over the misuse of the term war weary. Why was I enraged? You know, I think we have to be careful about the words we use to describe things. That's the first thing. But I also think that I know the origins of the phrase war weary pertain specifically to the First World War and the Second World War, when we had thousands of casualties. And by that, I mean killed in action. Thousands every week, every day. If you've ever talked to anybody who was alive in either World War I or World War II, they will tell you everybody knew someone, and often more than one someone, who lost a brother, a father, or a son, or they experienced it. This is not to diminish the casualties that we have today, the wounds, or the people who have been killed. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to draw a contrast between one era and another, and I want you to think about that. It's not about, this podcast isn't about Afghanistan, and it's not about the troops. It's about something entirely different. It's about being unemployed. The wounded at that time accounted for an even larger component of the population. Then you get to this economic question. Economically, both conflicts drained the country almost completely. World War II more than World War I. And though people were working again by the end of the war, World War II I'm talking about now, the combined effect of the Depression that lasted from 1929 to the early 1940s and the diversion of consumer goods to war production had literally bled the country white. If you've read The Forgotten Man, if you've read any history of the country in the 1930s, particularly the latter part of the 1930s, you will discover that the policies that the Roosevelt administration enacted to address the problem with the economy did not work. And so you had this concern, and then that concern kind of gave way to concern about the war, the sort of the gathering, the storm, and then the actual war. One of my favorite things to do is to walk into the Dairy Queen over in Stadium Village by the U. On one side of the store is a giant picture of the opening of one of the first Dairy Queens. It's probably right after the war that this thing was done. And if you look closely at the photograph, I always do that. If I see old pictures, I'm the guy who will be standing, in the hallway there at Porky's on Nicollet, looking at every single one of those pictures that they got in that hallway. Because I am fascinated with old pictures of Minneapolis or Chicago or whatever town you're in. Because I really study them. You can learn a lot from just studying them. But you look at this picture, and I have no idea where it was taken. Could have been New Jersey, could have been Columbus, Ohio, for all I know. Could have been Minneapolis, St. Paul. It looks like it was someplace out east. It was probably right after the war. And if you look closely at the photograph, which is a big wall-sized mural, so you really have no problem looking closely at anything in the picture, you'll see cracked and broken sidewalks. You'll see run-down old cars. You'll see broken windows in the apartments behind the Dairy Queen. And more importantly, you'll see that the people are not fat. They are not well-dressed. Their clothes are not dirty. They are not torn to pieces, but they're threadbare. And you will see that they are thin. They're almost emaciated. And that is what I think of as war-weary. I mean, you look at pictures of refugees from World War II or World War I. Those people are war-weary. That does not describe what we in the nation are living through. I mean, some pictures of the Marines after, let's say, Fallujah, they look war-weary. They got the 1,000-mile stare. But I'm talking about the country. I'm talking about back home. What we are living through is not war-weary. But I do believe that if we are not careful, we're going to live through an eerie reenactment of the era from 1929 through 1945, and then we will know what the phrase war-weary truly means. Until then, using that phrase upsets me because it really doesn't describe what is happening to us as a people. Now, you might wonder, what does this have to do with the unemployment of Bob Davis as a talk show host, or anybody else for that matter? And as I said, I got fired from KSTP. It triggered this odyssey. It was a long, an odyssey is a long series of wanderings or adventures, especially when filled with notable experiences, hardships, and so forth. And that is everything that I experienced when I was unemployed. I tie the war-weary thing in because I think one of the reasons I reacted to the use of the phrase has to do with what I learned while I was away from the wage-earning sector of our society. Because when you find yourself among the ranks of the unemployed, the first thing you feel is dread, okay? If you are any kind of responsible person, you end up blaming yourself. Whether it was your fault or not, you wonder what you could have done differently, right? And those of you who are unemployed or have been unemployed know exactly what I'm talking about because you have felt that feeling. And I think it's a universal thing, and I don't think it's an unusual feeling that people have. And, you tell your friends, I don't care, and they'll go, oh, well, you'll be back in no time. And you laugh, and you say you're glad to be, on vacation, but the dread is still there when you go to sleep, and it is still there when you wake up in the morning, and eventually you realize that it's never going to go away. As long as you're unemployed, you're going to have that dread. So for people who have been unemployed for a couple of years, 3 years, 4 years, that is deep, okay? It's not from a war that we feel these things. Because now, if you're unemployed and you've been unemployed for a while, you are a statistic. And when the unemployment numbers come out on the news, you think, well, they're talking about me. First thing that happens is you wake up and you think, now what? You think, what am I going to do now? Now, I'm a radio person. I rent. I live in a cheap apartment. I save some money. I can move anywhere in the country if I need to. My kid is grown. His college is paid for. So I was very, very lucky. And I thought, well, I really don't want to move, but if I have to, I will. And that gets you through the first couple of weeks. But here's the thing that happens. The phone does not ring. You think people are going to call you. And I don't care what you do, whether you drive a Bobcat or you work in radio or you are, an engineer or whatever it is that you do, the first thing when you get fired, you think is going to happen is you're going to get called, somebody's going to call you to work. And this is the beginning of the realization that there is a real problem in this country that you don't get called. And most of us who have lived any length of time know that, we remember the last time, perhaps. And we might remember we got a call from somebody the last time that we were unemployed. And we didn't have to be unemployed that long. But then the first thing that happens is you're like, wow, this is taking a long time for somebody to call you back. And then they flat out don't call you back. Now, I'm not going to take you through a day-to-day diary of what happened to me. I'm just going to tell you that if you are unemployed recently, the one thing that you're going to figure out is that nobody's going to call you back right away. In fact, no one will call you back at all. Your good friends, your real friends, you're going to find out who they are, will call you. But job prospects generally will not call you back. It's like you have cancer or something. And after a while, you figure out that if you don't do something, no one is going to come and help you. Now, in my case, I started to think about what I could do to help myself. And it didn't happen right away. I was pissed. I was just really angry because it happened kind of unexpectedly, and I was just very angry. But eventually, I started realizing that nobody was going to help me and that I was going to have to help myself. And the first thing I did was learn how to put these podcasts up, which was a painful learning experience for me and for my friend Kyle Sheely, who is my producer, who was trying to help me do this technically, who finally just hung up on me. But I ended up doing it. And at the time, I thought, well, I'm going to make money doing this podcasting, but we're far from the point where podcasters are going to be able to make a lot of money. Some of them are, but we're not there yet. Anyway, then I figured out how to do radio shows for radio stations in distant markets from the apartment in Uptown where everything's happening. And you would have laughed at me, during those summer months when I had to shut all the windows, lock them down. I had to turn the air conditioning on way back in the back, and I had to do the show in my swimming trunks and stuff blankets in the windows to try to keep the sound down so that people didn't know I was doing this for my apartment. Some of the stations they were like, yeah, tell people you're doing it for your apartment. That's cool. But basically what ended up happening was, I started to make a living, and I realized, I can actually do this. And I'm not going to get rich doing it, but I could keep the lights and the power on, and I could fill my freezer with meat and burritos, and, it got me through. And and by the way, met and worked with and grew and learned new skills and met a lot of great people and friends that I still have to this day. But in the end, when I started filling in for what we thought would be a couple of weeks for Andrew Lee on KTLK, it ended up turning into a full-time gig. I have to tell you, I was very happy because I was working again. You can't imagine how happy. But I also feel and felt a little sad to see the freelance business have to be sort of put back on hold because it gave me such a sense of accomplishment and freedom. And this is what I'm trying to get across. For those of us who have been through this, there is no help coming. You have to help yourself, and it's really important to remember that. And I'm trying to share this. I want to share this so that people who are going through this crucible of unemployment know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train. And second, I want to share it because the effect of the journey I went on, something I kind of alluded to in the New Year's podcast, was almost a reinvention of self. And it turned out to be one of the best things that's ever happened to me. People say that. And I always used to say, well, no, that is not the best. Getting fired is not the best thing that could happen to you. But it's happened to me. Well, it used to happen to me a lot in my early career because I was working part-time here and there, and I'd do something stupid and they'd fire me because I'm in radio. They'd just fire me. But I hadn't been fired in a long time. So I had been fired once and then fired again 10 years later. And so I was real sensitive to it. The first time I got fired, I wasn't out of work that long. But this time, I really realized we have a serious economic problem. Today in America, the official employment figure is 9.1%. Unofficially, it could be as high as 15%. Some economists feel that it's actually higher than that, and that if it was calculated the way they calculated it back 20 years ago, or back in the 1930s, I don't think we would be surprised to find that unemployment today is as high as it was in the Depression. And if you doubt that, understand they have these models that they use to calculate unemployment. They really don't know how many people are unemployed. They just calculate it based on some raw data, and they change those calculations every now and then. And if they calculated it back the way they did in the 1930s, I think it would be, I know it would be significantly higher. I don't know if it would be 25%. But, one of the things about those numbers, and this is one of the things I've learned in the period of time that I actually studied this problem when I was out of work, is that they just don't calculate it the same as they used to. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see that our unemployment numbers are dangerously high. But there are safety nets today, extended unemployment, AFDC, food aid, and so forth, that end up keeping the problem sort of hidden. And I'm not ashamed to say that I used unemployment, which I'd never used before in my working life. I did not like it. I had never been through a period of unemployment that lasted 18 months. And I will tell you that I did not like the false sense of security that it gave me. And I did not like having to report my weekly work activity to the state. But I did it because I wanted that money, and I didn't want to get in trouble if I happened to work. Now, we don't have 99-week unemployment in Minnesota. And I remember when it finally ran out, I was actually relieved, because I think that when you don't take the unemployment, you really get busy. You really figure out how to make money, and you can. And I think a lot of us with jobs today, we forget that we can make money. We can go out there and generate work. We just have to get off our ass and do it. What we are experiencing today in this country is a twofold problem. First, there's a pronounced lack of leadership. The act of leading, guidance and direction is missing. It's not present in American politics or business today. And second, the decisions that our leaders have made regarding the economy are making our problems worse, not better, kind of like the 1930s. So all of us skilled laborers, artists, artisans, industrial workers, even some who have college degrees or graduate degrees, are finding it difficult, if not impossible, to get work, especially males, especially teenagers, especially black males. And so the dread that I spoke of is there among those who are unemployed, and it's also there, but unspoken, among those who have jobs. The other day, our producer, Andrew Lee, said to me, you're really intense when you talk about the economy. And I was always intense when I talked about the economy, but now it's even more so after, talking to Andrew and reflecting on that. I am intense when I talk about the economy, because when I read those unemployment numbers, or I see, someone like Ben Bernanke, who has this shaky voice, who kind of talks like this and says, well, I don't know what's wrong. He doesn't know what's wrong with the economy. I feel that dread, because I feel like if they can't fix this, it's going to continue to get worse, and that's not good for anybody. And people who are working prefer not to think about it or recognize it. But, if you're working, you feel it too. It's like hearing someone you love has cancer, or being concerned that you have cancer. It's dread. I mean, that's the word. And what makes me intense about the economy is this feeling of dread is new in my experience in America. People keep asking, what's wrong? Well, I'll tell you. Men of all ages, teenagers and black people, feel this dread because we are afraid that we will be put out of work again, or because we are out of work now. And by the way, I'm not trying to make a racial thing out of it. I'm just saying this has hit men of all ages, and particularly black men, very hard, and teenagers very hard. Unemployment was always high among black males, but it is really pronounced today. So it's not war weary. We are in a state of dread and deep concern about our individual futures and our future as a nation. Now, one of the things I want to say is that to deal with unemployment, you end up reaching down and reinventing yourself. You decide, I am not going to give up. Sooner or later, you reach a point, and I can almost tell you when this point was for me. You just say, you know what? God damn it, I am not giving up. I don't care what these people say or do to me. I refuse to quit. I am not going to quit. I will continue, and I will fight on, and I will eventually prevail. I spent many a late night walking the streets, working out what I was going to do. And a lot of times I'd take the digital recorder with me and do a podcast. But I was always thinking, what am I going to do? And I eventually likened this to a guerrilla struggle. And I'm serious about this. I regarded each check I got for doing a show someplace as water and ammunition to continue the struggle, and I still do. That is something I probably will never let go of. I have been in radio a long time, and this is a dynamic business. It's a technical business, and it contracts its workforce when the economy is bad and expands it when it's good. Radio is usually the first to feel the effects of a bad economic downturn or even normal slowdowns, and then it's the first to emerge when things get better. Now, I've been through a lot of slowdowns and speed-ups in my time in this business, but I have never seen the industry struggle as it has over the past 3 years, and particularly the past 5 years. Now, I've heard many of the same stories from my friends in engineering and printing and other kinds of businesses. Trucking for a while was the same thing. So to the people that are going through this, wherever you are, I want to say, and I want this podcast to say to you, don't quit. It isn't your fault. You have to take this time to rest and reinvent yourself and put all your force behind something creative that you like to do. You have to get your health back. You have to keep calling people, even when they don't call you back. And when it's over, you're going to be stronger for it, and you're going to know who your true friends are. But to the larger issue, we need to be thinking about the same approach to our country, which faces the same terminal crisis we face as individuals. No one is coming. I talk to people all the time who keep thinking someone is going to come. There is no politician, there is no change agent that is going to fix this. What we have to do is we have to get into these issues one by one. We have to break them down. We have to get away from this view that everything is a conspiracy. It's some dark group of men somewhere in a basement bunker or in some expensive hotel in Switzerland that are doing this to us, or the speculators or the evil businessmen. We have to break these things down and figure out their solutions ourselves. We have to use the tools at our disposal to do that. And then we need to get out and share our ideas with other like-minded and not so like-minded individuals to test our ideas against what others have decided until we reach a consensus. This is the only way that we're going to come out of this. One of the things I did while I was out of work was get involved in politics. And I mean, I had the time, and I have to say that I learned so much. For one thing, I learned I didn't have all the answers. I learned it is not easy. No matter, you can stand on the sidelines, and we do it all the time in radio and talk radio, and say this is what should be done. But when you're involved in it, you learn nothing is possible alone. You have to work with other human beings. You have to convince people of your views. They may not agree with everything. You have to agree on what you're going to work on and what you're not going to work on together. And in politics, you learn that the more collaboration that you have, the more people, the less you have to do as an individual, the more effective that you can be. I also learned that what faces this country is really a generational challenge. It took 70 years for this country to get this screwed up. So, they established Social Security and all these, national programs, and the whole, sort of progressive flowering started 70 years ago. And so over the last 70 years, the country has moved further and further toward these government programs and government involvement, and making us the slaves of government and making us the wards of the state and so forth. It's going to take a generation to get it back. And we can set the country back on the right course, and we can teach those who come behind us by finally setting the right example individually. You got to show them, if you have a son or a daughter that's 20 or 22, they have no idea. I didn't have any idea what unemployment or what it was like to lose your job later on in your career and try to figure out what you're going to do and so forth. Now, my dad went through it, and he set an example for me. But we have to set an example. We, people who have been around for a while, for the younger generation of how to handle this. And moping around and showing that fear and showing that dread and living that dread is really a frightening thing for the younger generation. Being shot down behind enemy lines, that's what I refer to being. It's like being shot down. You got to work through the rice paddies to get to the helicopter. Pardon the Vietnam analogy, but you know what I mean. And it taught me to be way more resourceful. So I know that I'm stronger than I was before, and I know that I am stronger than I actually thought I was, because I hadn't tested myself this way before this. And I hope that this is a metaphor for America. I see a lot of news every day. I hear all these pundits and experts talking about how America is played out, it's war-weary, that our future is dim. And I've lived through difficult times before, and it got better when we took the reins and stood up for ourselves and started to make the change happen. I hate to say you're the change, but you're the change. There is no dearth of creativity in America. There is no dearth of resources in America. This is the greatest country, this we the people thing. We just have to decide that we're not going to quit and that we're not going to give up and that we're not going to allow the government to run our lives and run the country into the ground. And we're going to object to incorrect language describing our mood. War weary doesn't describe it because the problem that we have is economic and it's a problem of leadership. It isn't a war problem. Not to say, again, I don't want to minimize the casualties or the effects of war. But if we aren't careful, we are going to have a situation that is comparable to World War II because we are in the middle of an administration by a president who is a very poor leader. Very poor. And frankly, I'm not very impressed with congressional leadership going back to Nancy Pelosi. So we have bad leaders today, and they're looking for leadership from us, and we're looking for leadership from them. Guess what? Nobody's coming. We got to figure this out ourselves. And I think what happens is when you go through this, you say, well, I don't want to end up as a ward of the state, and you just put one foot in front of the other, and you do one thing every day, and that furthers your goal. And whatever your goal is, you just do one thing a day to try to reach the goal. And you don't stop doing that once the crisis is over. You realize at some point that this is the best way to live. Honestly, I hope I never forget how it felt, although I would prefer not to go through it again. I hope I never forget that feeling of dread or the small feelings of triumph when I would win some small victory and, sort of get somebody to call me back or get a show on some station somewhere or find some new lead or do a radio show for some radio station that I always dreamed that I wanted to work for. I mean, I always wanted to work for WLS when I was a kid. I grew up wishing I could work there. And let me tell you something. When I went there and worked there and actually experienced it after it was over, I stood out on the corner, in front of the Stone Container Building where the original, where WLS was in Chicago when I was a kid. We'd go down there and we'd stand in front of that window and press our noses up to the glass and watch. And I wept. I mean, it affected me so emotionally. I actually wept in gratitude that I had the chance in my life to do that. So that was one of the little victories that I experienced, and I mean it, and it felt really amazing. So I think in some small way that this is how we feel as a nation, I hope, that we will come out the other side of this, and we will feel that sense of victory and that sense of gratitude up for that victory because we will have earned it. We will have made it happen. We will have turned the corner because we are not going to be led by these people in Washington. They're not going to lead us. We're going to have to be the ones to do it. Thanks for listening to the Bob Davis Podcast, and I'm proud to say you can hear me every morning with my friend Tom Emmer on the Davis and Emmer Show on News Talk 100.3 FM KTLK. If you're not in the Twin Cities, you can stream us from 6 to 9 Central on KTLKFM.com. There will be more podcasts because I've learned that the radio show is, something completely different than the podcast, and I love podcasting, and I come home every day with stuff in my head that I didn't say or wanted to say. So we will be doing more podcasts. So keep checking iTunes or check back to the Bob Davis Podcasts on, it's thebobdavispodcast.com to hear the next podcast. And thanks for listening.
Let me run with you tonight. I'll take you on a moonlight ride. There's someone I used to see, but she don't give a damn for me. Well, let me get to the point. Let's roll another joint and turn the radio loud. I'm too